What's up, guys? Today is going to be a compilation of Night Stalker's recent stuff, like his homecoming videos and all that. Until he gets back, we will be letting you know what's going on. I'm really thankful for all the support, and when he gets back, he'll be thankful for the support too. I'm sorry, I'm slurring. I've been up all night. I haven't slept any at all, and my back is killing me. But that's for Monday. But tomorrow will be a brand new video, all new stories of my voice. Let's call it a collab until he gets back. And again, thank you for all the support on what's going on, and I will see you tomorrow in that video.
I'll see you guys in the dark.
This post is less of an update, since all of this happened years ago, than it is a continuation. Long story short, my ex-date didn't get the message after homecoming junior year, and he ended up pulling some serious weird shit even until after we graduated. None of it was as epic as junior homecoming. It was definitely a cast of shadow over the later half of my high school experience. From here on out, due to his activity for the next 2 years, I'll be referring to him as my stalker. For the months after homecoming, things started to settle down again. I didn't have any classes with my stalker, and the only person I still had to deal with was the junior cheer captain. She would go out of her way to be nice to me, inviting me to parties and buying me coffee and giving me rides to games, basically bribing me to keep quiet about the manipulative person that she was. My stalker reappeared on Valentine's Day of 2016. I was still a junior, but I had almost forgotten about homecoming that happened when, halfway through my day, he cornered me in the hallway and gave me a rose out of his teeth. I hoped that would be the end of it, but I underestimated my classmates' appetite for drama. During 7th period theater, we were in the library computer lab. After the rose thing, my crush from fall semester, who had since come out as gay, warned us that my stalker was carrying around a present for me in his backpack. I thanked him for the heads up and told my best friend. She and I were sitting together on the inside of a row when the bell rang. We stood up to leave, but the girl on the other side of me turned to face us, blocking us off from the exit. She was a close friend of the junior cheer captain's. She asked me what I was doing after school, and I knew that she must be trying to herd me towards my stalker so I could collect my presents. I leveled with her, and I said I knew my stalker was waiting for me somewhere, and I told her straight up that I wasn't going to play nice with him anymore. She turned on the same old guilt trip as everyone else, telling me how much he cared about me and how hard he worked on these presents, but I refused to go. I knew I needed to get out of the school as soon as possible, before she just told my stalker to come meet me at the library instead of the theater hall. To get her out of my way, I said I'd go meet him after I went to the bathroom, and she moved out of the walkway. My friend and I hid out in the bathroom farthest from the theater hall. I knew he wouldn't leave until he delivered his gifts, and we had a rehearsal that day, so I knew I'd go down there sooner or later. My best friend suggested that she go down and retrieve the presents for me, so he'd leave before I had to go to the rehearsal. Intercept the gifts. 20 minutes later, they returned. Among the gifts were 3 boxes of my favorite candy, which I didn't really like anymore thanks to this whole mess, an expensive Doctor Who jewelry box, and a full bouquet of roses. Again. They told me, laughing uncomfortably, that there had been a whole group of people waiting for me to walk into the theater hall. My stalker wasn't too happy to hand over the presents, but my best friend made it clear I wouldn't be coming to get them, so he would have to hand them over to my friend or never deliver them at all. After about 10 minutes, the group waited for me to dissipate, and my stalker gave away the gifts. I was so creeped out that I didn't keep any of them, not even the jewelry box, which was TARDIS shaped and actually kind of cool. For my birthday a few weeks later, I got out of school after 4th period and went to a theme park with my cousin. I didn't tell anyone I was leaving or where I was going. My best friend told me my stalker had waited outside the theater hall for me with a letter and a rose in hand until the school kicked everyone out who wasn't in theater. I was assistant director and light crew for one act play that spring. An acquaintance of mine who didn't keep up with gossip was in charge of making the program, and she mentioned how cute my boyfriend was for taking out an ad in the program for me. I was significantly freaked out, told her I didn't have a boyfriend, and asked to see the ad he'd pay for. It was a picture of my stalker and I from junior homecoming, along with a note that said something like, "Good luck, Saucy. I love you." I begged my friend not to put it in the program, and she didn't. Seeing my obvious discomfort, she refused him his money and made some excuse about a local business buying more ad space. He tried the same trick for the last show of the year, which I was actually in. He showed up to opening night and got kicked out for filming. The theater department was so instituted a widespread rule of checking with the person an ad is targeted at before printing it, which is more than school administration ever cared to do. During a cleanup day for theater the summer before junior year, a guy from a different school showed up to help. He had been talking to me over social media for a few weeks, and I knew that I was his next target. He'd make a game out of going on a date with every girl in our department. Sure enough, he asked me out while I cleaned up the prop closet, and I agreed. He was decent looking, and he wasn't mentally unstable, even if he was, as we call, a fuckboy. I also knew that, if I played my cards right, I could turn this to my advantage. He was using me, so I just made sure I got something out of it too. We went on our date. It was okay, no weird advances or anything, and he bought me dinner. On the way home, I directed the conversation towards homecoming. He caught my drift and asked me right there, no muss, no fuss, and I said yes. Senior year started. My new date was all the way over at his school on the other side of town. My stalker was in 2 of my classes, 4th period biology and 6th period English, and had the same lunch as me. I was hyper aware of him staring at me every day, but didn't want to make a big deal about it. I knew he wanted my attention, and I refused to give it to him. Instead, I went about my life as usual. I made friends with the teachers who were lunch hall monitors, so I would leave the cafeteria, effectively avoiding my stalker. I ate lunch in the theater hall with my best friend every day. I asked my biology and English teachers not to make me sit by him or work in groups with him, and they agreed, if somewhat reluctantly. They, like pretty much everyone else, thought I was a dramatic cheerleader making up stories. I was a senior, and I really didn't want to deal with the bullshit of a crazy stalker anymore. Not that I ever wanted to be there in the first place. Homecoming was even earlier this year than the last. In English class, my stalker sat next to me, 2 theater girls who usually walked to 7th period with me, and he turned around to ask them for ideas of how to ask me to homecoming. They were in the camp of classmates who were amused by my stalker antics, so they wanted to rile him up and watch the fireworks. They also knew about the fuckboy I was talking to, because theater kids are the worst gossipers ever, and they gleefully told my stalker that I already had a date. He proceeded to attempt to bite his finger off in class, which went about as well as you might think. Obviously, he didn't succeed, but he did draw blood, and he terrified my 2 theater friends, who incited his instability. He stared at me the whole time, and I sat on the other side of the room and ignored him. I didn't care what he did. I refused to give him my attention, and I wouldn't be intimidated by him anymore. After class, my 2 friends came up to me and told me the details of what had just happened. Together, the 3 of us approached the English teacher. She believed me this time. He was moved into a different English class by the next week. Side note, bless this teacher. She was the first adult I encountered who took action to protect me, and she continued to check in with me about the situation throughout the rest of senior year. 6th period became nothing less than a sanctuary for me because, for once, somebody believed me, and they were actually listening. I didn't have to worry about him before 4th period because I skipped lunch every day. I was getting confident about my escape maneuvers. I forgot to mention the third and weirdest self-harm incident. After getting kicked out of my English class, he desperately wanted my attention, so he got a pass out of his school one day and found mine. He walked to the trash can outside the door of my class and watched in horror and disgust as he pulled out a tooth and held his face over the trash can, spitting out blood. I know I said I wasn't giving him attention anymore, but the kid just ripped out a body part. I feel like I'm allowed to be terrified at this point. Then my usual hall monitor was gone, and I got stuck in the cafeteria. I had been out of lunch for so long that I had forgotten my stalker wasn't the same one until I accidentally made eye contact with him, staring at me from across the room like some kind of grudge ghost. The second I saw him, he started speed walking across the room to my table. I ignored him, hoping he was just trying to psych me out, but it didn't work. He sat down in the seat next to mine. I was freaking out. I looked at the girl on the other side of me and begged her to get me out of there. She simply laughed at me. A year before, I would have kept quiet and dealt with my discomfort for fear of people hating me. But I was a year older and already contracting seniorities. So I stood up, grabbed my backpack, and stomped out of the lunchroom. The hall monitor stopped me, asking where I was going and if I had a hall pass. I said I was going to talk to the crisis counselor, and he let me go. Probably because he didn't want to touch that with a 10-foot pole. I walked directly to the counselor's office, signed in, and found myself sitting in her office a few minutes later. I told her the whole story from the beginning. I had been to her office before, and she shooed me away after saying I was being too dramatic. This time, she didn't. Instead, she spent the greater half of the hour I was there asking why I hadn't come to her when it all started. When I finally got her to address the actual problem, her first question reaffirmed my fears. She asked me, after I told her about the self-harm and threats and general creepiness, what about him made me so opposed to dating him. I thought I was going to scream. I had a gut feeling that the truth wouldn't get me anywhere, and I needed action. I didn't care how I got it done, but I needed him out of my life, and definitely out of my classes. So, knowing full well her attachment to Jesus, I pulled the Saving Myself for Jesus card. I put all those Sundays being forced to go to church to good use, and it worked. She stopped asking me why I waited, why not just date him, and asked what would make me feel safer. I told her to get him out of my schedule, and she said she'd look into my options. Within a few days, I was called back to her office. She had got him placed in another lunch period, but biology was only offered fourth period, and both of us needed it to graduate. I still considered this a victory. I only had to see him for 50 minutes every day. She told me to talk to her whenever I needed someone to lean on. She would make sure my teachers understood. Fun fact, junior year, my best friend was sexually assaulted by an adult man. When she left class, mid-panic attack, to go see the crisis counselor, she was told to pull herself together and get back to class before she missed anything important. My stalker found new methods of seeing me. My best friend didn't make the cast of Winter Musical, but I did. I didn't realize that I had been isolated until my stalker joined crew and regularly tried to intimidate me. He would drill holes in set pieces that didn't need work because I was sitting near them, and he wanted to watch me flinch. He would steal the props and hide them in the shop so that I had to be near him to retrieve them. My new crush and I were co-dance captains, and she convinced her friend the set head to keep my stalker off stage at all times. After musical ended in spring, my new crush told me she'd heard my stalker was getting angry about me playing hard to get. I was hanging out in the theater hall with a few crew kids, getting ready for one-act play, when one of them pointed at me, shocked, and went, "You're saucy?" He told me he'd seen pictures of my backyard. I was confused and weirded out, so he explained that my stalker had shown him pictures of my backyard and porch. I asked to see them, and he said he didn't have the pictures. He'd just been shown them by my stalker. I didn't really believe him, and he could tell, so he said, You have a big bay window in your living room, a bunch of bikes on your back porch, and a big-ass rose bush. It was an accurate description. I don't know for sure how to explain that, but I've theorized that my stalker had, at some point, been in my backyard before we adopted our purebred Doberman. The dog had freaked out in the middle of the night a few times, but we brushed it off. Now I wasn't so sure. My bedroom was in the front of the house, so I tried to reassure myself by thinking he hadn't seen me changing or anything super scary, but it really didn't help. My best friend was disowned by her mother and stepdad, and within a weekend, she had shipped off to live with her biological father. I told myself I could survive the next 4 months and graduate, and then I'd never see my stalker again. I persuaded my parents. As prom and graduation approached, I had only wanted one present, my best friend. They paid for her plane ticket both ways and flew her home to be my date to prom. I kept her a secret so I could surprise our other friends when she showed up at prom to dance with us. My stalker only briefly entertained the thought of asking me to prom, which I later discovered was the now senior year cheer captain's doing. I guess she'd finally started to realize the full effect of her actions, because she told him he needed to leave me alone. I don't know what else she said, but he went eerily silent in the weeks leading up to prom. He still came up to the last play of the year, but he didn't film me this time. He waited for me outside the auditorium afterwards, but I was with other people on our way to cast dinner, and he didn't try anything. At prom, my friends were elated when they saw my best friend had returned. We danced and talked shit and had a great time together. It was honestly one of the best moments of my life when they walked in and saw her. Of course, my stalker tried one last time to change my mind. My friends and I were sitting at one of the tables together, laughing and catching up, and I saw my best friend's expression turn into a glare when someone walked up behind me. I turned around to see my stalker waiting behind my chair. I stood up. I was taller than him in heels, and said as calmly as possible that he wasn't welcome here. I was also 17 and pissed off, feeling unstoppable, so I tacked on, "If you ever speak to me again, I will rip your dick off." It was the last thing I ever said to him. My best friend flew away again. We all graduated, and everyone went our separate ways for college. I saw my stalker again at the first homecoming after I graduated high school, but he didn't talk to me. He just stared at me the whole game. Later, he showed up to my sister's fall play at our alma mater, and he asked a cast member where she was and if I was there. Lucky me, the cast member was one of my littles, and he told my stalker he needed to leave immediately. I guess the story was a happy ending. I got away in one piece, with no foreseeable appearance of my stalker in my future. To my dad, I do in fact like boys. I like girls too. But for the sake of this post, and my happiness, homecoming date from hell, worst set crew member ever, and bringer of teeth roses and junior mints, let's not meet ever again. Up until junior year of high school, I flew mostly under the social radar and stuck to my status as a nerd girl. But when I was 15, I joined varsity cheer. My school's cheerleaders weren't popular by definition, but everyone kind of knew who we were because we were on the announcements, performed at pep rallies, and generally engaged with the students a lot. I made a lot of friends that year, and some of them happened to be the cool kids for a while. I thought this was my long-awaited karma payoff for the years of bullying I'd suffer at their hands. I've even developed a crush on one of them, a crush which the junior cheer captain herself volunteered to help me pursue. Homecoming is a big deal from where I'm from, and I began to fantasize about my crush asking me to go with him. I'd heard rumors he was planning a dramatic proposal, and as homecoming season approached, I became more and more sure I would be his date. The junior cheer captain, who was close with him, kept dropping hints that I was right. One day at practice, she asked me what my favorite candy was, and I knew it would be so my crush would know what to give me. You can imagine my surprise when, after an exhausting theater rehearsal, I walked into the parking lot and was confronted by a guy I'd hardly spoken to, asking me to be his date. My theater friends all applauded, assuming I was overjoyed. I saw both my parents in the parking lot recording the whole surprise. But most importantly, the cool kids I'd recently befriended were standing right there behind him, egging him on. I didn't understand why, because he wasn't popular at all. In fact, he was known to be kind of creepy. The junior cheer captain was laughing, encouraging him to give me the box of my favorite candy he was holding. She definitely orchestrated the whole thing. I didn't really know the guy, but I didn't want to humiliate him in front of the coolest kids in school, so I faked a smile and rolled with it. I promised myself I'd deny him later, in private, so he wouldn't be embarrassed. Afterwards, when my parents excitedly asked me how I felt about the ordeal, I explained how uncomfortable it made me. I said that I got strong, creepy vibes from the guy. That didn't fly with my parents. My mother accused me of having expectations too high, and my father demanded to know, not for the first time, if I was secretly a lesbian. I had never had a boyfriend or shown much interest in dating. To make his case stronger, I'd just become best friends with the only openly gay girl our school had. Long story short, I knew that if I shut down my date, I'd effectively declare war on my parents. However, I played my dad's protective instinct against him and persuaded him to let me friend-zone my date. After all, he knows how high school boys think, right? I texted my date that night and explained that I only saw us as friends, but would still be happy to go to homecoming with him. He was very polite about it, although I could tell he was interested in me romantically. It seemed we reached a deal until the next day at school, when one of my cheerleader friends referred to my date as my boyfriend. I corrected her and told her we're just going to homecoming as friends. She seemed confused and told me my date was telling anyone who would listen that I was his girlfriend. A few more of my friends approached me with similar comments, and I confronted my date about them. He denied all involvement and suggested it was just a rumor. I reminded him that we were just friends, and I had zero romantic interest in him. He said that he understood. I got a call from the junior cheer captain. She pretended to be sweet, but I was still annoyed that she'd led me on to believe my crush would ask me to homecoming. She began her attempt to persuade me that I was wrong to friend-zone my date. She said that she'd spent many afternoons planning his proposal with him, and she knew he was kind of creepy from afar, but he was sweet and caring underneath all of that. I said, if he was such a catch, she should date him herself. Annoyed, she dropped the sweet act. She told me that I had to date him, because he liked me so much, and he'd gone through so much trouble just to ask me to homecoming. I had to give him a chance, because he'd gone out on a limb for me. I told her that she was wrong, and that I didn't have to do anything that I didn't want to, and I owed him nothing. I ended up hanging up on her soon after that, but that was just the beginning. Starting the next Monday, he would corner me in the hallway to give me a rose he held in his teeth. He usually did so between my 6th and 7th periods, when my path through the hall crossed his. I was deeply uncomfortable with this, and told him so, but he just wouldn't stop. I took different routes to escape him, but the junior cheer captain and her posse made a point of tracking me down so that he could find me elsewhere. Every time he did this, everyone in the area would treat it as a sweet romantic gesture, despite my obvious discomfort. Wouldn't any girl be lucky to have a boy so devoted to her that he gave her a rose every day? He was still telling everyone that I was his girlfriend as well. The final straw for me was when he walked into a class he wasn't in to find me and give me my daily rose. My teacher, who was friends with the junior cheer captain, let this happen. For weeks afterwards, she would ask me about my date every day. When he came in, I told him to get out and just leave me alone. His feelings were clearly hurt, and he left looking like a kicked puppy. My classmates started calling me a cold hard bitch. It didn't matter what I had to say about him. I was an ice queen, refusing this sweet boy's advances. Everyone in the school had decided that I was in love with him, and nobody cared what I had to say about it. My crush, who was a part of the popular group, joined the junior cheer captain in pursuing me into returning my date's feelings. At every event where the cheerleaders were present, my date would push his way to the front of the crowd. He would go to great lengths just to get my attention. At a football game, he would give me flags in the student section so I'd look at him when we were cheering. The other girls would make comments on how endearing he was when he waited in the parking lot by our bus back at the school just to hug me and tell me how great I did. I didn't know what else to do other than just let this happen. I had only recently ascended to a position of visibility. If I conflicted too hard with the cool kids who were so dead set on setting me up with this guy, I could be an outsider all over again. I hoped that if I just kept ranting to my real friends about how creepy he was, and publicly let him do what he wanted, it would all just blow over. My school had a 15-second attention span, so some scandal had to one-up me sooner or later. The truth emerged, as usual, in the locker room. It turns out the junior cheer captain had been telling him during their afternoons together that I was into him. He'd come to her for help announcing his crush on me, and she'd gone a step further and convinced him that I felt the same, despite the fact that I didn't even know his name. She'd lied to him for weeks prior to the homecoming proposal. And when I told her that was wrong, she didn't even care. She told me that I should be so grateful, because everybody was starting to think that I was gay. My best friend, the lesbian who was starting a gay revolution, and I, inspired, spread a rumor that we were dating. After all, everybody already thought that I was gay. But my date wasn't fazed. In fact, he told everyone that he'd just turned me straight again. Ew. 3 weeks after he asked me, it was finally homecoming night. Thanks to cheer obligations and a complete coincidence involving a switched backpack that left me without my dress, I ended up only attending the dance for half an hour. My date awkwardly stood in the side of the room while I danced my heart out to Mr. Brightside. I almost felt bad for him when, right at the end, the junior cheer captain appeared like a summoned demon to suggest we slow dance at the next opportunity. Thank God I escaped that one by walking to the DJ and suggested that he play Footloose. My date walked me out to the parking lot to wait for my mom to pick me up. While we waited for her to drive around, which took entirely too long because she still hoped I'd stop making a fuss and just date him, he asked me out. I politely declined. He quickly stammered that he would go with a group of people, like the junior cheer captain and my crush. I denied him again and made it clear we were only friends, and I wasn't interested in romantic endeavors because I was just too busy. It was actually true. I was in all advanced classes, varsity, theater, and cheer, and worked part-time. A few days later, a teacher eloped to Vegas, and nobody cared about my love life anymore. My date and I were distanced again by classes and activities and work. It appeared that everyone was going back to normal. That Friday at the football game, my crush asked me to sit on his shoulders for the alma mater, kind of a romantic thing at my school. Overjoyed, I accepted, and I hoped this was the beginning of a new chapter for me. I ignored the frantically waving flag in my stands. Monday, my date stood on a chair in his second period class and announced that everyone should be wary of my crush because he would steal your girl. I heard everyone buzzing about it for a few hours later. When someone called me a bitch, again, for breaking my date's heart, I knew I was being dramatic, but I decided to just not go to lunch that day, terrified of running into him. I'm so glad that I didn't. Later, I saw on Snapchat that my date had carved my name into his arm with a pair of scissors. His bleeding arm was screenshotted and sent to me by half a dozen people, most of them demanding why I hurt him like this. He did it in the middle of lunch in a crowded cafeteria, and somehow, no administration noticed or even cared. The school was buzzing. My date was a heartbroken victim, and I was the evil, secretly gay bitch who wouldn't give him a chance. I got so many dirty looks. By fifth period, I was ready to just walk out, but my good girl instincts kicked in, and I decided to tough it out for just 2 more hours. Around that time, I got a panicked text from one of my cheer friends. While she'd been insistent that I date this creepy guy, She'd apparently changed her mind after the lunch incident earlier. She told me that my date, who was in her 5th period class, was going off the rails. He started out saying that he wanted to kill himself because I wouldn't love him. This had escalated to saying he'd kill my crush for lying to me and stealing me away. Finally, he'd started talking about how he knew where I lived. My parents had given him my address when he initially wanted to ask me to the dance at my house, and he would make me pay for wronging him. I knew that, after 6th period, our paths through the hall would cross again. Since the beginning of this ordeal, the school had cracked down on students getting outside, and my alternate route to escape him was no longer an option. My class was at the far end of the hall, with nowhere to go but into the central hub, and he would be coming from the other end of the hallway towards mine. I was stuck up a chimney, basically. Desperate, I texted the junior cheer captain to finish what she started and tell him that I was not and had never been interested in him. She made this mess, and I would make sure that she had to clean it up. She said she'd go to the counselor, but she didn't know what else to do. This was way beyond her control now. For the first and only time, I skipped class. I hid out in the theater hall and waited for 7th period. I got a few texts during the passing period that my date was waiting for me by the bathrooms. There was a little alcove right there where you can't see people coming around the corner, and the thought of him hiding there and waiting for me to walk by alone terrified me. Right before 7th period began, a few of my classmates burst in, cackling, and proclaimed that my date was coming down after school to kill my crush. They thought this was hilarious, but judging by the look on my crush's face, this wasn't a joke to him anymore. Our teacher brushed this off as typical theater drama. I watched the clock and tried not to cry, knowing that by the time the bell rang, my date would be outside, waiting for me and my crush to emerge. That day ended up being a work day, so my crush and I were able to escape the classroom and hide elsewhere in the theater hall to get away from him. He opted for the black box theater, and I went for the lighting closet. Obviously, I didn't witness what happened, but my best friend filled me in afterwards. Allegedly, my date had turned up 3 minutes before the bell rang and stood outside the classroom where he couldn't see me when we opened the door. He told everyone standing around that he was ready to have a knife fight with my crush. We don't know if he actually had a knife or not, but the idea that he might was enough to terrify me. His arm was wrapped in a paper towel that he was bleeding through. My best friend told him my crush and I were gone, but he didn't believe her. He stood outside for 25 minutes until the administrators began walking through the hall to make sure no one was in the school who shouldn't be. My date wasn't in theater, so he wasn't allowed to stick around. That night, I texted him that not only would I never date him, but could no longer even see a friendship between us. I sent him a number to a suicide hotline and told him to just get help. Finally, I told him he needed to learn what no meant, and I never wanted to speak to him ever again. He responded that he was sorry and asked if there was anything he could do to fix this. I told him no. I don't think he learned the meaning of the word after all, because the same pattern repeated itself a few months later on Valentine's Day, the next year at homecoming, senior year's Valentine's Day, and prom, but those are just other stories. I've since graduated and gone off to college hundreds of miles away from him. My family back home moved from the address my parents gave him. Contrary to popular belief, I'm not gay. My crush, on the other hand, came out a few months later, and we were friends for the rest of the high school. I'm working on handling romantic endeavors in a healthy way, but he got in my head. He was the first person to ever show interest in me. Ironically, the last time I saw him was my first and only homecoming game after graduation. But this time, I had true friends to defend me when he predictably tried to pull some weird stuff with me. The worst part, looking back, was somehow being at fault for everything. To this day, people from high school reference the whole ordeal. At this time, you wouldn't date that poor shy kid. I can't even appreciate red roses anymore. So, homecoming date from hell, let's not meet ever again. If you enjoyed this video,
Please subscribe, like, and hit the bell for notifications on future videos, and become a stalker of the night. And I'll see you next time.